Greetings, folks. This is Brian Harris, Independent Black Voters on Facebook. As we continue our Let's Get to Know the Candidate series. Folks, the election is coming up in November. It is very important that we include as many voters and that we inform as many voters on the system and the people that are running. Today, we have Mr. Kelly Quin. He is running for state assembly. How are you doing, Mr. Quin?
Good, thank you.
Okay, great. And you're running as a Republican, correct?
Correct.
So, okay, we're nonpartisan, so we talk to everyone about their values, beliefs, ideology, so that we are informed voters. So I thank you for taking the time to come out here. And I'm going to start off by asking you, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us what made you decide to run, and tell us why you think that you are the candidate to be our state assembly in your district.
Well, again, I'm Kelly Quin. I'm running for Assembly District 5. I've lived in Nevada for over 30 years. I've been in the district for 24 years. Excuse me. Currently, I'm a correctional sergeant out at High Desert State Prison. I've worked for state agencies, county agencies. I've worked in some of the legislative issues, worked on bills throughout legislature, at least 3 sessions, actually in Carson City, working on various bills for healthcare, emergency services, emergency medical services. When I first moved to Nevada, I lived out in rural Nevada in Beatty. I worked in the mining industry, worked in the hazardous waste industry, and eventually went to work for the state as a regulator for emergency medical services. And I worked there for several years, again, working on legislative issues there, and came down to Las Vegas and worked for the health district doing the same thing. I regulated the EMS system and fire system here for a moment. I became self-employed and worked for myself for several years. And during the crash of 2008, I went back to work serving the state at the Department of Corrections. And that's where I'm at currently, and as a correctional sergeant. And right now, I'm looking at returning to state service as a legislative representative. And in a nutshell, that's where I'm at now. So
great. So again, thanks you for that intro. Tell us again a little bit more of what drove you to run for state assembly, and what are your key issues that you see that drove you to run for state assembly?
I'll turn you up here a little bit. So what got me interested in running again running for the first time, actually. Again, I had some work in legislature before, and that really piqued my interest. I enjoyed it. I liked working with legislature and working through the issues. I kind of stepped away from that when I was self-employed, and December, January, I was talking to a few people that kind of got me back into it and piqued my interest again in the political environment and serving politically. Then I found out there were several seats going unopposed. So I just talked to my wife about it and said, okay, at this point in my life, if nobody else is going to file on this, then I'm going to. So that happened, and I said, yeah, I need to step up and serve in this capacity because there's a need. So some of the top issues, also during the lockdown, the COVID lockdowns, that really affected me and my workplace as well. We had numerous officers, well, all of us were mandated to accept the vaccine. Mm-hmm. And I chose not to do that because I don't think anybody should be required to do that. If you choose to do it, that's your choice to make with informed consent. And I chose not to. And so my job was threatened for many months in that regard. So the government overreach for that was a big issue for me and many of the officers that I work with. And that really became my first issue, is that no governor should have the ability of locking down an economy like that, mandating people to take certain medical treatments. And so that's where I really started pursuing that. And now, that said, a governor or emergency responder should have the ability to do it temporarily for a short period. So one of my platform items is to look at the emergency response statutes and put a timeline in there. And I use Mount Charleston as an example. Say there's a fire at Mount Charleston, the government needs to have the ability to evacuate that community, shut down the businesses, allocate resources for that, but not ongoing for an extended period. So my thought is, look at 60 days. That's enough time to convene one of the standing committees and have some sort of legislative oversight to say, yes, we're going to continue this, or no, we're not going to continue this. And had that been in place during the COVID lockdowns, I don't think it would have been locked down as long as we were. So that was really the government overreach part of it.
Okay. Let me ask you. Go ahead. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So that was the first point, and I'll be glad to come back to it if you choose. The second issues at hand really are the safety and the law enforcement. People are stepping out of law enforcement. Again, looking at our own department, we are very short-staffed. Law enforcement has been treated very poorly, in my opinion. And we need to get back to supporting law enforcement and making it an honorable profession and making it worthwhile for people to step into that. And we don't have that right now. All of the law enforcement agencies are very short-staffed right now and are being attacked on various levels. So safety, as I'm outdoor walking and everything, safety is by far the number one issue that people have. And safety in the community, safety in the schools, and now the economy and the inflation rate right now. Right now, if you haven't increased your paycheck by $717, I think it's the latest statistic, then inflation is affecting you. Okay. And so that's, the gas prices are a classic example of that. School curricula is another one. Our schools rank the lowest in the country. And even since my kids were in school, and my son is now 31 years old, even when my kids were in school here, we were in the bottom 5 consistently every year. And why is that? We keep throwing money at it, but it seems to always be absorbed at the administrative level. It's not making it to the classroom. So we need to ensure that the monies we are allocating for that are actually making it to the student and benefiting the student, which then creates a workforce here that employers are willing to hire. They're educated well enough to be hired here. Even going into the community college and university system here, they have to take remedial training to bridge that gap between the high schools and where they should be. So that shouldn't happen. So they should come out of high school ready to continue or ready to enter into the workforce.
Great. Let me ask you a couple questions pertaining to this and then go back in more detail. One of the issues you talked about, safety. And tell me, what area was it that you live again?
District 5.
Which is
the boundaries, the extreme boundaries on that. The northern is Alta down to Russell.
Okay.
and from Hualapai down to almost Buffalo, between Buffalo and Rainbow.
Okay.
That's tropical.
High crime or low crime?
I wouldn't say it's high crime, but there's a fair amount of crime here in this district, as is across the valley.
Okay. Did you say high or low in your area? That's what I'm asking.
I wouldn't say it's high or low either way. I think it's kind of mid-range.
Okay, great. And I'm asking some questions before we go back and asking questions. You came through the school system, correct? Public school system? You came through, oh, first, going back.
No, I grew up in Montana.
Okay. Okay, are you for school vouchers, and do you think we should break up the school system?
On the vouchers, I believe the money should go with the student. So in the voucher program, perhaps in the education savings accounts, yes. I think we can create competition amongst the schools to force them to better themselves. And I think that's where that could come in. And as far as breaking up the district, I would be in favor of that as well, because we're so huge here. And, you know, Rancho High School has different needs than Mesquite, and say Bonanza has different needs than somebody else across the valley. So if we were to break it up into smaller groups like that, they can manage themselves easier, and they can make themselves more competitive with the other schools, and competition just breeds more excellence, I think.
Okay.
And it's like the districts that we have within the state, we don't have a full state school district because Clark County has different needs than Esmeralda County, and they need to be able to manage those themselves.
Okay, let me ask some questions. This is independent Black voters, and I appreciate getting on it because many times people stay in their little envelope and they only talk to people that actually have their life experiences and don't. So I'm going to start off. I wanted to address the issue again, first, the vouchers. A little bit about my history. I grew up in Gary, Indiana. I am a product of the public school system there. I graduated from Gary Roosevelt on to Purdue University. I got an undergrad in electrical engineering technology, and I have an MBA from Purdue University. So the public school systems have done well to me. As a 60s baby, there were people, both white and Black, who decided and elected to go to private schools. They did not take the money with them. If they decided to go to a private school, they paid the admission expense, but the dollars were left in the public school system simply because the public school systems were created because of the imbalance of the schooling back in the day. Back in the history, and this comes back to history, rich people, kids were taught. The next level, when they found out they didn't have enough rich people, they taught poor white people, and Black people have always been at the bottom of the educational system. The public system was put in place to at least try to give some semblance of opportunity to our folks. We look at it a lot of times, and I asked that question specifically, that when you start taking your money out of the public system to bring it into a system of privatized school systems, of you now are recreating systemic racism, which we fought for since the end of slavery. Because now, if I'm a Mormon, I give preferential treatment to Mormon if I have a Mormon school. If I'm a Catholic, I give preferential treatment to Catholics. So not only do I give the preferential treatment, I get the money too. We're in a system where systemic racism is never identified or easily identified. It's couched in a way that it sounds good. And that's why I question the fact of why would we, when we have a system that we should be repairing and fixing, why would we take money out and give it to people who have abandoned it and say, here's your tax money back? Literally, our belief is fix the school system. But if you don't fix the school system, you can go somewhere. You just need to pay for it. So I wanted to ask you that specific question there. And then the second part on the schools, because I decided to start here first. Again, I told you I was a product of Gary, Indiana. And in Gary, Indiana, our schools were funded by the by properties. So the more expensive your property was, the more money that was allocated to your school systems. So as the steel industry went down, and in areas that are predominantly Black, our property values tend to be lower. Our school systems back in where I was in the 1970s, we sent a lot of people to college. We strive to be, we strive to do the best in a difficult situation, but the school system was designed so that less and less of the economic monies needed to run that school system died. So there's a direct correlation between economics and your school system. I live in Henderson. If I was only concerned about Henderson, or if I lived in Summerlin and I was only concerned about Summerlin, of course I want to break up the school system, because I now leave my problems over there with those folks who have less, the predominantly Black and brown folks, because now Clark County is now a predominantly minority school system. And by breaking up the school systems, you're literally putting back segregation, because yeah, a few of us who are fortunate enough to live in Henderson or living to someone will benefit, but the masses of people who look like me will basically move even further back. So we have a lot of concerns from the whole issue of opportunity, systemic racism, and the fact that we have an area now where we have 1,200 school teachers that are not there. If we broke up the school system, do you think the teachers would stay in the toughest areas, or they would go to Henderson, or would you go to, or would they go to Summerlin? So give me your opinion there on the school systems, just our concerns about systemic racism and your thoughts there.
Well, I think where the teachers are going to go is they're going to compete for that. And I think many of the teachers teach for the love of teaching.
Say it again.
You said again?
That's it? Yeah.
I didn't hear what you're saying.
Continue.
Oh.
And I apologize,
No.
I was a little long-winded on that one.
No, I think the teachers and the good teachers that do teach for the love of teaching and are effective with teaching the students, they need to be rewarded hugely. The teachers that come in and turn on a video and sit and read their book at the desk and let a video teach their students, they need to leave. So I think regarding the teachers, that part of it needs to be addressed amongst the teachers union and the administration in the school district as well. So again, I think the teachers are going to go where they can most be beneficial. I use one of my own relatives as an example. He came here, he lived pretty much in Summerlin, but he taught on the far east side. I forget which high school that is, but it's up on Hollywood. And when he first came here, I'll tell you the story real quick. So he came here, retired from the school system in Montana, taught advanced mathematics for most of his career, retired from that system, saw a need here in Las Vegas. He said, okay, we'll go to Las Vegas and work for 5 years and see how it goes. He came here and was originally going to work at Centennial and ended up going to work over on the east side. And the first couple of weeks he was there, the students didn't have a clue what he was talking about. And he was teaching general mathematics, not advanced, just general mathematics. And the students didn't have a clue. So he taught all of his students, all of his classes, to find out where they were at. Across the board, they were at a 4th grade level, and he was teaching high school. So he started coming in early, staying through his lunch break, staying after school. Any student that wanted to come and learn more about math. He said within 3 months, every one of his students was high school level, and now he could start teaching them where they should be. That's a teacher that needs to be rewarded. And the students, when they started this whole process, you had the students that were disruptive in class and causing problems. He didn't have the authority to manage his own classroom. But it got to the point where other students started policing themselves. They said, you don't want to learn from this guy? Get out. We want to learn from him. So they started kicking students out that were being disruptive. He didn't have the authority to do that. The teachers in this system need to have the authority to manage their own classrooms. And I use myself as an example. The EMT program they have at Rancho High School, I guest taught some of those classes. And I'd go over there and the classroom was just chaos. So I pulled the teacher aside, and I was the regulator that was going to sign off on their certificates when they came out. So I took the teacher aside and said, what is going on with this classroom? He said, well, we can't really do much about it. Everybody has a right to an education. And I said, well, I don't have to sign off on their certificates either. And he said, okay, well, we'll talk to the principal about it, whatever. And eventually it got to the point to where the students would sit in their chair and pay attention and not be working on other stuff or playing on their phones. But again, the teachers need to have authority to manage their own classroom so they can teach all the students. The students don't want to be there, they don't want to be there. So move on.
Okay, I'm going to ask two questions, and I'm going to open it up for everybody else because I do not want to take all the questions, and I appreciate your candor, and I know they're chomping at the bit. I wanted to jump back where you were talking about overreach, and I asked this question again. When you come to school, you have to take a vaccination or you're not allowed to come to school, correct?
Not necessarily. As per the Civil Rights Act and Title VII, if you either get a vaccine or you have a medical exemption or you have a religious exemption.
But for the most part,
the exemption clauses are there.
Okay, but for the most part, you have to take a vaccination. Your kids have to take one to come to school, correct?
I am not certain of that right now. Exactly.
Okay. Do you think that vaccinations are government overreach?
No, certain types of vaccines are beneficial.
And
the COVID vaccine was experimental, still is experimental.
Okay, I wanted to ask that question. Now, let me ask you a question. We just had the Roe versus Wade. What is your opinion? I'm gonna let you guys ask questions. I just had to ask two questions, and I'm gonna shut up and let you all. What was your opinion there? Were you for or against the end of Roe versus Wade?
I was for it because that was, again, a law that had no business at the federal level, that belonged at the state level. And that's exactly what Roe v. Wade did or the overturning of Roe v. Wade is it put it back to the states.
And I ask this question because I always ask it. Government overreach is when people are electing. See, I believe in a woman's right to control her body. I can't have a baby. I'm not pro, I'm not anti, but again, I sometimes look at people who say I'm for government overreach, but I support the government controlling a woman's body, because in the same sense, whether it is the state or the federal government, you are still controlling her body. And that to me is government overreach. But the same people who have a problem with masks seem to not have a problem with that type of government overreach. So I'm gonna give me a quick, because these guys are chomping at the bit. I am going to be silent to the end and let some other people ask some questions, because we're here to get to know you and we're here to talk about issues so that we can find out ideologies, values, beliefs, and hopefully find common ground.
So what was the question in there?
I just asked you how you can support basically the government, be it the federal government or the states, controlling a woman's body and consider that okay, while you have no problem, but you have a problem with masks or vaccinations. And it just seems to be sometimes the height of hypocrisy when I'm for something on one hand, which is government overreach, but I'm not for something else because it does not apply to me directly. And so I actually give us a quick opinion on that, but then I'm going to ask people here. I'm muting my mic, so anybody that wants to ask some questions, please jump in there. And when we get closer to the end, I may have 1 or 2 questions.
So the government overreach that I was specifically referring to was the COVID mandates and the lockdown of our economy. Again, I don't think any governor on either party should have the ability of doing that for an extended period of time, like what happened in Nevada. And the vaccine mandates, and again, going back to vaccines, yes, there are some vaccines that have been well proven and well researched and well proven to be effective. The COVID vaccine is not one of them. The COVID vaccine is still experimental, and our government was mandating people to get a vaccine, and which was experimental, and there were adverse reactions to that vaccine. My own department, we had roughly 120, 140 officers that refused to get the vaccine as mandated, because our policy and the emergency regulation that the Board of Health approved, well, let me go back to that regulation. That was done at the request of Governor Sisolak, and it did include get the vaccine, request a medical exemption, request a religious exemption. And each of these officers did request one of those exemptions. Many of them had legitimate medical reasons that they could not do it. I know of at least 3 of them that had adverse reactions when they were forced to anyway, at risk of losing their job. So they went ahead and got the vaccine, even though their doctor told them not to. One officer in particular, she landed in ICU for 5 days after receiving the vaccine. And she still has today myocarditis, which she's under the care of a cardiologist and is on cardiac meds because of it. And that was a direct result of receiving the vaccine. So the mandate on that, again, if she chose to take that on her own, that's fine. It's her decision to make, as is my decision or yours or any of the panel. That should be your own decision. It should not be mandated to do so, especially for an experimental procedure.
Okay.
The abortion topic that you come up with, the whole Roe v. Wade, put it back to the states. Right now, this next legislature has no ability of doing anything with abortion in Nevada. That has to go back to the vote of the people. And so whoever gets elected this next session is not even on the table to do anything with.
Okay. I want to, and I thank you for being candid. I just want to give these folks a chance because I know they have some questions and they took the time to go on here. And I'm going to say whoever wants to ask the next question, batter up. I'm on mute for the next 20 minutes.
Rodney, you seem to have a lot of questions over in the chat. Do you want to start?
Oh, I haven't even looked at the chat. Let me.
I'm Rodney Smith. I did put several questions in the chat as you were speaking. And one of the questions I asked was, do you believe in the idea of America? And then further down, I asked if you believe that America is an experiment. So we can start with those 2.
Yes, I believe in America, and I believe in the Constitution as well. I think it's one of the greatest documents ever written and prepared for. And I think we need to uphold the Constitution. We need to teach about the Constitution, absolutely. And we don't do that in the school system here. And learned that, especially since running for office. Before ever running for the office, I started learning about the Constitution myself in more detail and realizing how much I didn't understand about it. To touch on that real quick, and I'll pose this question without expecting an answer, but one of my instructors in that class was a legislator in Texas, and he pointed out at one point when he was in office that a study showed that 50% of the elected officials couldn't name the 3 branches of government. And then he posed the comment that over 90% couldn't name even 3 of the 5 freedoms granted in the First Amendment. Now, I was one of them. I could only name 3. I couldn't name all 5. So I'll pose the question to you guys without expecting an answer. Can you name 3 or 5 of the freedoms granted in the First Amendment? I pose that question to people all the time, and they cannot do it. And said, how can that be? We need to be teaching that in our schools, and people need to be familiar with at least the first Bill of Rights. And so yes, I believe in America very strongly, and I think we've gotten far, far away from the Constitution and what the Constitution grants us in our freedoms. And that's where the government overreach, and my tagline is restoring our freedoms, and we have gotten so far away from that. And
So I also asked, do you believe that America is an experiment?
I don't think it's an experiment. It's a country that's been founded on biblical beliefs that is ongoing, and we need to restore those beliefs. And we removed God out of virtually everything.
So before you get on the religion piece, which is a part of the First Amendment, since you want to know, could people mention things associated with the First Amendment? But so I just want to be clear. So you do not believe that America is an experiment, or do you believe that America is an experiment?
I'm not sure what you're referring to as an experiment. I've heard that comment before, but I'm not sure exactly what you're meaning by it. So,
well, I mean, it's either it's something that has been proven to work, or it is something that has not been proven and is in work. So just like science, electricity, for example, it's a theory, but the theory doesn't necessarily mean it's fact. But we work off of that theory. It is a working theory. The ideas and concepts of America had never been before until America was established. So it was an experiment in governance, unlike anything ever before in the history of the country. So that's why I was asking, do you believe that it is? Did you believe in America and in the ideas of America? And do you believe that it is an experiment?
Well, it's not an experiment because I think it has been proven. And it has been proven to be very successful for over 200 years. And unlike many societies that they form a government and it fails relatively quickly, I think we have been a success, and it has been proven to be a success. Now we've gotten away from a lot of things, but it's ever evolving because of our election process and our educational processes. Lincoln had the quote of the philosophy of the classroom in one generation becomes the policy of the government the next generation. And so it's ever changing every generation. There's tweaks and modification to our government. But I think the base document that our founders created has been proven to be very successful across the world.
So in that base document that our founders created, they also allowed for slavery. They also allowed for women not to have the right to vote. Under those same documents, there was the Chinese and Asian American Exclusion Act. There was also the removal of Native people from their lands. Are you supportive of all of those things that that document allowed?
But did you also know that every one of the founders who had slaves, those slaves were released before they died?
But that's not my question.
And they
My
fought
for
for the release of those slaves?
So what
That's
I
actually
do,
not true. That's
What I
actually
do-
not true.
what I do know is that George Washington, at the end, or what should have been the end of the Revolutionary War, would not end the war until all of the property of the slave owners who were promised freedom by the British if they fought for the British, that he would actually not end the war until that property, human beings, were repatriated back to their owners. So I guess the juxtaposition for me is you say that they somehow were benevolent towards slavery, but the president, or who would be the president of the United States, continued a war until all of the property, which was human beings, was brought back to their supposed owners.
But that document that they created has also allowed it to where we are today. So we don't have slavery anymore, at least legal slavery. We don't have the prohibition for women voting.
So actually, we do
allowed
have legal slavery under the same amendment that did free some slaves. So you talked about, you read the Constitution, and I've read the Constitution too. And under the 13th Amendment, there is a slavery clause that does allow for slavery when humans are incarcerated. So I just want to make sure that we're talking factually here. And do you support that slavery clause in this Constitution that you seem to think so much of?
For the prison system, you mean?
Well, do you support the slavery clause? Do you support slavery in any fashion?
No, I don't.
So then you do not support the slavery clause in the Nevada Constitution as well as the United States Constitution?
I would have to look at that, exactly what you're talking about, because
Well, you did say that you read the Constitution, and you inferred that others had not. So being one who has read it, and you're talking specifically about a document that you talk that we should live by and that we should go back to. And in that document that you're speaking of, there is a slavery clause. The simple question is, do you believe in slavery or not? And if you do not, then is there a problem with that Constitution?
I do not believe in slavery, and I'm not familiar with the clause that you're talking about. So yes, that's my own ignorance on that, I guess, that I need to go back and read specifically what you're referring to, because I'm not familiar with the slavery.
So let me help you out. Let me help you out, because this is to educate people, because you may one day become a representative in the Nevada Assembly. And so this is something for you to research. In the Nevada state constitution, there is a clause that allows for slavery. In the United States Constitution, in the 13th Amendment, there is a clause that allows for slavery. And I would love for you to research both of those. And just as you spoke about how great the Constitution is, then I would love for you to come back and share your opinions once you've read that and educated yourself.
Okay. Well, I hear you saying that, or implying that you don't believe that our Constitution is great. And that's where we're going to differ.
And let me kind of do this, because we're going to come back to this, but I wanted to give chance. Mr. Robert Taylor is on cue. He had a question. I want to let him get that off key. And I'm going to say, the question I think is, we believe that America is an experiment. And what he's trying to get across to you is we ever change. And change is what helps to make America better. And we have to assume that it is not a stagnant, America was not great again. America becomes greater when this experiment continues to change and correct itself. But I'm gonna ask,
I was talking about with the election cycle and the generational cycles, is that it is ever changing. but it has been proven to be a success, is what I was
Okay.
getting.
Okay, Robert, you had a question. I wanted to make sure you got a chance to throw that out there.
Yes, how you doing? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Good morning. Thanks for taking this interview. My name is Robert Taylor. I was candidate for Norfolk City Mayor, and I'm a business owner. My question for you is, first I'll do a statement, then a question. The statement is, a lot of people don't know that it's the very first time that the baby boomers are outnumbered by people under the age of 25, which are the new voters, right? And I'm big with connecting with the younger people. And I want to know, as you run, how are you connecting with the younger voters? And the second fold to this question is, if you were to be elected, what would you do to reach out to our younger demographic to let them know about your position?
I try to talk to them as much as I can when I can get an audience with them. I refer a lot to my corrections work, but and we see a lot of the youthful offenders come in there that have no respect for anyone or anything, and I see that in the street also, that the disrespect that's out there, especially towards law enforcement as well, is huge. But as far as reaching out to them and just talking to them, having some conversation is huge. As far as an elected official, to reach out to them, again, that the method on that's going to be through the school system, I believe. I'm not a big social media person. I'm not hanging out at the clubs. I'm not doing that kind of stuff. But I think when you do have an audience with them, that we need to have conversation. I have had kids. I've have a number of acquaintances still. I have friendships and relationships built with younger people now, but as far as going out and seeking to have relationships with everyone in the street, I'm not into all of that and hanging out, like I said, at clubs in the street. The younger voters absolutely need to be involved in the process. Again, they need to be informed what the process is. I've been in Las Vegas where people don't even know that legislature is in session, let alone what's happening, because there's such a divide between the North and the South. And the only thing they hear is a 2-minute clip on the news media that, hey, this is what happened in legislature. They need to be taught that process again, going back to the high schools, that this is what happens in Nevada. It's a part-time legislature. It meets every 2 years. This is how you get involved, and this is how you get your voice heard. And that doesn't happen. So that would be one of my things to do, is to help educate them to do that.
I need to ask a couple. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. That's a big concern of mine. I was at Canyon Springs yesterday at the Black Student Union, speaking to them about the vision board and getting their goals together for the year. And I always explain to these students that when adults come to your school, we could be making money. We're taking our time out to give you knowledge to help you go further. And when I said that, they all changed their attitude and listened much more and was appreciative of me being there. So I tell everybody, anybody, when you can, you have the opportunity to go to schools, like you went to Rancho, always speak to our students, because they literally are the future. And thank you very much.
Okay.
And when I was teaching down at Rancho too, it was a great opportunity to meet with some of them. And again, talking to offenders that I've had relationships with at my work, and I see them out in the street now, by far the response has been positive, that they actually learned something and that had an impact on their lives when they did come back out into the street. So again, just having those conversations, showing a little respect, and it goes a long ways.
Okay, great. First of all, thank you again, because we value your time. We will probably go a little bit over, but I wanted to ask you, there are three, this question is, do you believe that there was major voter fraud in the last election? Who do you believe won as far as the president? And are you more concerned about voter security or voter suppression?
Security. Yes, I believe there's fraud. I've seen that or been reported firsthand to me that there was fraud. I've had, just in the last election cycle, let's throw a couple examples. I've had one of my officers say that she received 5 ballots at her apartment. 2 of them were from previous tenants. 1 was from a previous roommate. Another was from a cousin of hers that used her address at DMV, who happened to be an illegal alien, and then her own. So she had 5 of them. Another officer had 3. I've received ballots at my own home from the previous owners here, and I've been here for 24 years. And so those voter rolls absolutely need to be cleaned up. And people that aren't at a particular residence need to be removed. There's been documents showing of an address or addresses for vacant lots, storage units, various places where people don't live. And so, yes, there is fraud in that regard. Do I believe that it was enough to sway an election? It's not for me to determine. Law enforcement needs to do that. And I'm not a statistician either to dig into it that deep. And but Biden was elected. He's our current president, and I accept that. Just like the last primary election, there's a lot of controversy right now on that, and there's lawsuits that are digging deeper into some of that. I think the election integrity part of it, I think the mail-in ballots are a disaster. That's just opening everything up for fraud, and that's where it's going to happen. Now, mail-in ballots are different than absentee ballots. Absentee ballots, absolutely, because that falls mostly to our military folks, or if you're on vacation, you're going to be gone, you can request an absentee ballot to have your voice heard. And absolutely, that should be in place. Mail-in ballots that gets mailed to every person on the voter rolls, no, that needs to be cleaned up.
Okay, let me ask you a question, because again, you talk about receiving ballots. My father is dead. I still receive his, and I throw it in the garbage.
You should report that so that his name can be taken off.
But what I'm going to, you received them, you say you know of it. Do you know people who took these ballots and sent them in, or just they received the ballot, so therefore it must have been voter fraud? I asked that question because
again,
do you know people who specifically committed voter fraud?
I do. I know 2 people that went to the election with their mail-in ballots, and because they were if the line was too long, they were going to just drop their mail-in ballots. The line was short, so they voted live and in person. When they were done, they asked the poll workers, "What do you want me to do with this?" They told me, "Go ahead and drop it in the box."
Well,
that's
the way the system,
felony in the state of Nevada.
Okay, and the way the system is designed, because there's mail-in and voter, there's actually a 2-part system that makes sure only one of those is counted. So if you did do something where you did that, that's not necessarily voter fraud. It is when you purposely go in to use somebody else's name or to vote fraudulently. So that's why I asked specifically, do you know of people who said, I specifically went out to commit voter fraud? Now, the second part, history of the United States. And this is why talking to us, understanding, white people do not have voter suppression. When you have people who bring arms to predominantly Black areas because they want to police the voting process, having mail-in ballots gives us more of an opportunity to not see voter suppression. When you have areas in predominantly Black areas where they shut down the voting booths so that Black people are systemically having to wait in line for hours and hours, when you put in rules that if you bring water to a person online, because you want them to give up and leave. We are more concerned about voter suppression. Historically, there has been nothing shown that our voting system is unsecure. There has been no mass fraud. And it seems to be more of, if I say I'm for voter security, that means I'm really for voter suppression. Because if you are born in the United States, you should have the right to vote, and it should be easy. If you are not born in the United States, I agree, you should not vote. And our system so far has shown us that it's pretty secure the way it is. But and you're here with the independent Black voters, they had poll taxes back in the day to keep Black people from vote. They have tests that have been designed to turn around and suppress the vote. When people are not happy because the outcome was theirs, many times they call fraud and voter security as really a voter suppression tactic. So when I hear you're more concerned about security versus suppression, what's your belief on suppression? And do you believe that there is an attempt to suppress the vote of people in America who should have a right to vote?
To suppress, no. And I don't agree that only if you're born in the country you should be able to vote. I think if you've immigrated here, if you're legally here, you should have the right to vote.
I agree with you.
I immigrated here from another country, and so she has the right to vote. So the suppression that you're talking about, where polls are closing, I'll pose the question to you. Do you have firsthand knowledge of that?
Yes.
That is a felony, and did you report it?
We're talking about across the country.
Did you?
No, let me come back and say what I was saying, so I put clarity. You look at an area, it's predominantly Black. You put a less amount of polling systems so that lines are long, so the ability to vote is harder. I'm talking about access to in-person voting. Much of the mail-in was designed to make it easier for folks like myself, who in the past have been intimidated. In the past, they have put up rules and regulations or strategies that suppress the vote. Now, I'm going to ask Ms. Cosgrove, because she is a doctorate. She has a doctorate. She is at CSN. I purposely bring her in because when you made the statement about not knowing the Constitution, you're looking at two people here, Mr. Rodney Smith and Ms. Sandra Cosgrove, that could probably tell you more than you've ever known about the Constitution. But Ms. Cosgrove, could you give me a quick, on what I was saying there, can you give me some commentary, please?
So you want me to comment on what you were talking about with voter suppression?
Yes.
So nationally, there are examples of having, like in Alabama, saying you have to have a voter ID and then closing the DMVs out in rural areas. And so there's been lawsuits over that. In Georgia, having out of machines that were not able to be turned on in predominantly Black areas where there weren't in predominantly white areas. We've been fortunate in the state of Nevada that we've had both Democrats and Republicans be very open to trying to make our elections secure, to make them safe, to make them effective, to make them easy. When you start something new, oftentimes we have hiccups and bumps, and we need to fix things to make sure there is not the appearance of not having security. And so starting the mail-in ballots going to everyone, our Secretary of State, Barbara Sagafsky, our Clark County Registrar, Joe Gloria, has said, we need the public to help us when you're getting those errant ballots to get them back to us so we can clean up the rolls. Yes. And so that would be a way to deal with that, to make sure that we aren't having ballots floating around. But I can tell you that the Secretary of State, when she takes very seriously the idea of voter fraud. And so anybody that feels that there has been fraud or some problems can file a complaint with her office. Mark Galashan, the Deputy Secretary of State for Elections, then does a thorough investigation. And so far in their investigations, they haven't found anything that rises to the criminal level of fraud. And so I would just hope if you got elected, whoever's going to be our next Secretary of State, because we're going to have a new one, that you would be willing to work with their office to have some type of a system to make sure that if there are folks like yourself who feel like fraud's happening, that they can go through a very easy process to report it, that process is then transparent, that we then can all agree, on the findings, whatever they are. So I think nationally, we do have to worry about, voter fraud. I think internally, though, is we just need a legislature that works very closely with our Secretary of State's office
Absolutely.
to make sure that those processes are such that we all trust. If we think fraud has happened, that we trust that process to find it.
Absolutely.
You'd be willing to do that?
Absolutely. That needs to
Okay.
happen. It has to happen. The whole process, there's so much division over it, especially right now, that it obviously needs work done to it. And I've talked to many of the Secretary of State candidates, and they all have the same view that it needs to be cleaned up. There's holes throughout the system that needs to be filled. And even, Mr. Harris talking about the suppression side of it, that needs to be fixed also. If that's happening in the state of Nevada, then that needs to be brought to whomever can fix it and fix it, because that should never be happening here.
And let me tell, yeah.
Right.
And let me make a statement. Because of the way our laws are designed, you're not seeing it here. This is a national issue. If you're not concerned about voter suppression nationally, then you're part of the problem. I tell that to people because yes, our state, because of the way it's run right now, you will not see the voter suppression that you're seeing in certain states. So I tell those people who are very gung-ho about voter security, if you kind of brush aside voter suppression, then you're part of the problem, because voter security that sacrifices, that creates voter suppression will never fly in my community. Which brings me, and we're getting to the end. This is and I thank you. Black folks as a whole are trying to reach out. I am a big believer that we need to court the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, and the new third party should it come into play. Black people are historically conservative in many of their views. However, and this goes back from the 60s, back to from the beginning of slavery for now, we have always had to support safety for our communities, from the Sundowner laws to lynchings to the second class citizenship of the Black community. Right now, there is a concern with the Black community of the rise of white nationalism. There is a concern in the Republican Party of the acceptance of groups like the Proud Boys. As a Republican, give me your opinion. What is your opinion when it comes to those three issues? And how is it that the Republican Party can work to be more inclusive of the Black community by understanding our fears and concerns?
Well, I think racism, as you're describing it, to me is racism, and that should not be tolerated anywhere on any race. And I've experienced it, I've seen it. And again, going back to the prison system, everything's about race. Even the initial classification, first thing they look at is race. And the inmate population is all about race. And the gang violence is about race. And that has no place in society. And going back to my own experiences, now I was born in Oregon, but I lived 3.5 years in Southern Virginia. I went to a predominantly Black school. Myself, my brother, and I think 3 other white kids went to that 1st through 3rd grade. And Southern Virginia in the early 70s still had a lot of segregation and a lot of racism. There's still a lot of racism there now. So yes, I have seen it. I've experienced it. It has no place. And you talk about the systemic racism, and I pose this question many, many times to officers that I work with that are Black, and look at the school system. So my former wife and I were in the same college programs and for environmental studies. She had virtually all of her schooling paid for through grants and scholarships because she was a female in a science. I could not get one grant or scholarship for my program when we're in the exact same program because I was a white male. The only legal systemic racism is affirmative action. And even that, I think, has no place. And again, posing the question to officers I work with, I pose that question. Did you get any grants or scholarships for your college education?
Okay, let me
Every one of them did.
okay, let me reverse you back to the specific question because you're kind of deviating from what my specific question was. As I said, the reason you are on here as an independent Black voter that actually voted in the Republican Party in the primaries because I voted against white nationalists. I voted in the Republican Party against what we are seeing, the rise of white nationalism in your party. So let's deviate back to the question I said. The perception in the Black community is that the Republican Party has accepted groups like the Proud Boys. They have accepted a agenda that tends to be more white nationalist. You know, it's interesting because we can discuss the affirmative action issues, and that'd be another story, because if it was as you said, then there would be more Black people in positions of authority and our wealth would be much bigger, but that's another story. I want to go back to what I was talking about. How do you believe that your party, the Republican Party, that can bring a more of a balance and actually bring Black people who are conservative by nature, but are more concerned about safety, more concerned about the company that seems to be kept and associated and comfortable inside the Republican Party? Do you support the Proud Boys? Do you support a white nationalist agenda? Do you believe there need to be changes in your party to be more inclusive of my community so that we would have a reason to vote for you?
Well, I don't believe that the party as a whole is accepting of the Proud Boys or those kind of racial organizations. And I think that, no, personally, I don't either. And I don't look at race as being a way of accepting people into a party. That has no place with me. So I can't even relate to what you're talking about, really. The party as a whole needs to reach out to everybody. And I think that's what we're getting back to. There may have been those things in the past, but from what I'm seeing now, and the candidates I've talked to and my positions on things, it's not really an issue for us.
Okay, and I wanted your opinion on that because, again, my belief is that a state attorney, if you're going to run for a state assembly, you're not the party of the Republicans or the party of the Democrats. You should be the party of the people, or your concern should be that. And that's why we're trying to vet you and understand where your positions are. I will tell you, and I'm going to ask you to really double check that, because as I state, and I say this, I hear a lot of things. Black people are not anti-police. We're bad police. We're anti-bad police. Black people want to bring down systemic racism. It is alive and well in America. And unless people who are in these positions don't acknowledge and work towards it, and that was part of the reasoning and rationale of affirmative action. We have to look at and understand why things were put together. We wish this was a kind of colorblind society, but it is not. We ask you as a candidate, and this is the first step, not just on this Zoom call, but I challenge you to talk more about values and beliefs, because I say this many times, we are more alike than different, but unfortunately, we focus on the differences and we don't respect the concerns. We know that the browning of America tends to concern some people. And it is one of the reasons that we are seeing some of the issues that are happening today. So I've finished. I'm going to give you a chance to actually take it home and tell something. But if there's anybody, including you, Ms. Cosgrove, including you, Mike, Rodney, that want to make a comment or a finalized question, then we're going to let him take it home for us.
So
Go
I
ahead.
just want to say one thing. So I appreciate you being here, and I wanted to let you know I actually chair the Secretary of State's Advisory Committee on Participatory Democracy. And one of the things that we've been doing since 2020, when we went to the mail-in ballots, is we've been doing our meetings on Zoom and then broadcasted them through the Secretary of State's Facebook page, so the whole community can participate. And we have Deputy Secretary of State for Elections, Mark Galashan, come to every meeting and literally go over everything that just happened in the primary, new laws, anything we need to be doing differently. So if you could, it's at 1 p.m. on the 29th of August. If you can log in, and people can ask questions and they can call into the Zoom. Or if you're busy, because I know that's the middle of the afternoon, because it's through Facebook, it records. And so if you go to the Secretary of State's Facebook page and just click on videos, you'll see past meetings. But if you have questions, that might be an opportunity to come and directly be able to interact with Mark, who's an awesome guy.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
So to talk on the values of what I'm about, like I said, I've lived here in Nevada for over 30 years. At one point, I could say that I've been in every fire hall, ambulance bay, and hospital in the state of Nevada as a regulator, and that takes me throughout the state. So I'm very familiar with the entire state. I can't say that now because there's been so many more hospitals built, but I've been throughout the state very well. I've had my kids grow up here. Again, the grade school, middle school, high school. I think the school system does need work on it. I have Christian values, and I think that needs to be put back into the school system as well. I think it needs to be put back into the government as well. And I think that the church does belong in government. The government does not belong in the church. And we saw some of that happening in the last several years. The family values, and that is a huge part of the problems we're seeing now, is the breakdown of the family unit. And if we can encourage the families to stay together as opposed to breaking apart, I think we could fix a lot of our problems that we have in the state. Again, going back to the inmate population that I work with, by far the majority came from broken families without a father figure. The father figure needs to be well established and put back into these kids' lives. The school system right now, they're talking about the volunteer group of dads in the classrooms or dads in the hallways, whatever. But the school district keeps throwing roadblocks up to that. And with background checks and, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? Okay, we can what if all day long, but backgrounds aren't that difficult to do. Get the father figures back in the schools. Get the father figures back in the families. The systems that we have in place seem to encourage the breakup of the family, and that needs to be turned around. So that's a big part of what I'm about. I do agree with reaching out across the board. The just speaking with one of the Black Lives Matter founders here. And we were going through my agenda, and we were in agreement on almost every one of them, just a little different tweak on it. So that's an ongoing communication that we have, is the whole Black Lives Matter movement. It started out for police violence or the police overreach, but in my opinion, it was hijacked. And now that movement doesn't even come close to what it was originated on. And but we need to reach across and include everybody in the community, of all faiths, religions, backgrounds. So that's a little more of what I'm about. Hopefully that's coming across, that you have a better understanding of me and what I'm about, my values. I'd be glad to answer any more questions. If you want to go longer, I'm fine with that. So
Okay, great. I'm gonna see if some people have some before we go, because I can go all day. But I want you to think about something, because I continue to hear you say something. Everybody has different values and beliefs in America, what they believe religiously, be they Christian, be they be New Wave Christian, be they atheists, be they whatever. And the history of America, remember, the Pilgrims came because of their persecution for their religious beliefs. It's always great to have a non-separation of state and church when it's your church and values and beliefs that are in the front runner of the political. We were specifically designed to have a separation of church and state, because right now, if we had an influx of Muslims and the Muslim ideology came in, you'd have a major problem of it. I do not believe that there should be that churches and states should be in bed together. I purposely believe there was a reason the founding fathers had a separation of church and state. I believe that we've forgotten that history. I believe that as long as a person believes that their Christian values will be what dictates the government, they're okay with it until they find another group that has different values and beliefs to take over. So really think that through as you want to have a joining at the hip of your values and beliefs from your ideology and your Christian beliefs, because that's what they have in Muslim states. Is you turn around and be careful what you wish for, you just might get it, and it may not be what you thought it would be. So I wanted to leave you with that. I want to talk to you more one way or the other. I thank you. I'm trying to reach out to more of the Republican Party so that we can discuss ideologies, issues, and concerns. And for you to get on this call, I commend you, because I'm sure some people told you not to. So I thank you.
I make my own decisions.
Huh?
I make my own decisions.
Exactly. That's why I thank you for coming on. Michael, Rodney, you're still on here because I do value your time and his. If you have some comments or some other ones, as I said, Mr. Kelly said he's willing. So if you want to do that, we can do that. And once we finish, I'm going to do some ending quotes and we're going to get out of here.
Yes, this is Michael. I just want to thank Mr. Kelly for coming on and taking the time to be interviewed by the independent Black voters. We really appreciated his candid answers, and we're looking forward to hearing more from him.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Rodney, you have anything? I guess not. So I'm going to end this again. This is the Independent Black Voters on Facebook as we get to know the candidates. We're nonpartisan. We believe that we must talk to everyone because we will find out we are more alike than difference. But if we only talk to the people that we like, we do not address the issues we're different from. I look forward to talking to Mr. Kelly in the future, not on Zoom. I look forward to talking to people who don't have the same ideologies of myself, because it is very important that we be educated voters. It's very important that we discuss the issues. It's very important that we get to the truth and not necessarily the misinformation that we see from time to time. So again, the Independent Black Voters on Facebook, we thank you, Rodney. We thank you, Michael. We thank you, all the people that jumped on for helping us make this a success. So thank you again, Mr. Kelly, and we thank you for the time and the effort and the openness of your interview.
Thank you.